Growth is great, but you know how painful it can be when you get to a certain point in your company and what got you to that point is not going to get you to the next point. You've taken on the amount of projects that you can. You're perhaps moving in new directions. You need to bring on new bodies, and growth just becomes extremely challenging. That's what Claire Chandler and I talk about today on this week's episode of Construction Genius. Claire is a seasoned author, speaker, and consultant, and we're going to talk about how to scale your business painlessly. The key insight that you're going to get is a framework that I would like you to be able to take and use, and Claire's going to describe that later on. And it's called the Founder's Sweet Spot. And if you take the insight from that framework and use it in your business, it'll really help you to get the voices in your head out onto paper so you can think about where you've been, where you are now, and where you would like to go in terms of growing in a healthy way. So thank you for listening to Construction Genius today. Feel free to share this interview with other people and make a note of the specific applications that Claire and I talk about because it will help you to manage the growth that your business is going through. Thanks again for listening to Construction Genius today. This is Eric Anderton, and you're listening to Construction Genius, a leadership masterclass. Thomas Edison said that genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. If you're a construction leader, you know all about the perspiration, and this show is all about the 1% inspiration that you can add to your hard work to help you to improve your leadership. Claire, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks, Eric. It's great to be here.
You know, we were chatting just a minute ago, and you've worked with many companies who have gone through growth spurts, and yet that growth has not really been everything that they thought it would be. It's created a lot of tension and difficulties. Why is it that companies struggle when they get into a growth period in their business?
Yeah, what a great question to start off. And unfortunately, that tends to be the rule and not the exception. It's been my experience and my observation that companies have these almost fantasies about what growth will bring them, in that their employees, their leadership model, their structure, and the behaviors that are embedded in their culture are going to sustain them and are going to be the right ones, to kind of get them to the next level. And unfortunately, that is very seldom the case. So it's, it is often about, this sort of surprise when they find that what has gotten them to this point where they are now enjoying a growth spurt, a new opportunity, a larger client, that they can no longer sort of wing it and, rely upon what kind of got them to this point to get them to that next level.
Okay, so in your experience, what do you find gets people to the point of sort of takeoff? What have you seen? What do entrepreneurs do to get to the point where the growth is beginning to happen?
Yeah, so usually it's a first success, right? It's a first client, it's a first operation, it is a first engagement, it's a first
project,
project or building that has gone very well. And fortunately and unfortunately, the entrepreneurial companies become victims of their own success, right? Because they get that first client and they say, wow, this is fun, this is rewarding, this is making us revenue. And now we have to expand because we want more of this feeling. And so that first success sets an expectation that it will always be like this. Well, it's pretty easy to focus on one client and stay, focused with a core team and what you have to accomplish. Now, when you have to go and get it a little bit more complex, right? You add this layer of complexity, which means you perhaps have to serve two clients at the same time. You perhaps have to have two projects going at the same time. And now you have to hire more people than you had when you originally opened your doors. So those layers of complexity are what tend to weigh down the wings when you're trying to take off.
It's interesting. You mentioned the word culture earlier. Tell me what you mean by culture.
So culture to me, and I know that sounds very squishy, that it's just an HR term. To me, it is the absolute foundation. It's the bedrock of a company, because unless you are employing robots, which very few people I know do, you cannot get to where you are going without people. And people inform the culture. They are fed by the culture. or they are disillusioned by the culture. So culture to me is the fabric, it's the platform, it's the living and breathing engine of your company.
That's interesting. What do you mean by they're informed by the culture?
So a lot of companies, regardless of size, regardless of the point in their evolution, have a promise to an outside candidate about what life is going to be like when you come to work for them, right? So they will tell you, here's a place where you can truly grow, you can drive your own career, you can bring your best talents to work. We have a high tolerance for failure. We value the entrepreneurial spirit. And with very, very few exceptions, what ends up happening is those people get enamored by that brand promise. And then they come in and the culture does not reinforce that. They don't tolerate failure. They don't learn from failure. The entrepreneurial spirit that they said they wanted gets put into a well-defined box that is, ruled by the job description. And so when I say it's informed by culture, employees take very careful note about what gets rewarded, what gets tolerated, and really how they will survive in a company. You can't thrive unless your most basic survival needs are met first. Mm-hmm. So it's informed by the culture, because if there is a disconnect, a gap between what your culture delivers and what you promised that it would be all about, you're going to end up with a huge gap in terms of engagement, in terms of commitment, and in terms of enthusiasm.
So when you hit this point of growth, the culture in a business is established obviously by the founders and the leadership team. And like you said, that culture can be negative, it can be positive. I think one of the things that hinders some businesses when they hit that point of growth is the very thing that got them there, the culture itself. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs struggle because they want to maintain what's got them to this point, but they understand that they have to adapt in order to continue to grow in a healthy way. So how do those successful entrepreneurs get through that point of maintaining a core culture and yet adapting to growth?
Yeah, and it's so difficult, right? Because entrepreneurs as a species tend to be very spontaneous. They're very flexible. They don't like a lot of rules. It's why they didn't really fit into a corporate box. And what ends up happening is they attract that first wave of talent, right? That core team, to come on board with them. And they tell them, listen, we don't have a lot of rules. We don't have a lot of structure. You can kind of write your own job description, but we don't really pay attention to that too much. We just want you to bring your great, your best talents and your best ideas. And we're going to grow this thing beyond our wildest dreams. And that lasts for the first client, the first project, the first win. But then when you get to that growth spurt we talked about, and you start to bring on that next layer of people that were not part of this sort of startup energy, right? And this excitement of, well, a staff meeting for us is just, getting around the espresso machine, or, going out to amusement park and hanging out and having fun.
Right.
So now when you're adding this next layer of talent, because again, you've had some early success, that next layer of talent is going to give you some very important feedback, right? They're going to tell you where the holes are in your culture. They're going to tell you things like, the onboarding experience here was a bit bumpy, or right. I'm glad I stuck out your hiring process because it was arduous and unnecessarily disorganized, but I'm glad I'm here. That's some really interesting feedback around where you need to put your focus if you are going to not only keep the people that have gotten you here, but continue to grow in the right direction.
So can you give us an example of a company that you've worked with where they were at this point of growth, they were struggling, and then they found some successes?
Yeah. So one of the clients that I continue to have to this day, and I've worked with them for close to 10 years now, they first started out as a founder in a dream, right? And they had a little bit of added complexity because they were a startup that was owned by an international company. So this was their first foray into North America. They're in the manufacturing and mining and metals industry. So a lot of, heavy equipment and construction and, kind of the dirty jobs that you hear about. And so they went from the founder and, a part-time assistant to landing that first contract. that first client engagement on a construction site. And while it was exciting, it was sort of the, oh crap, what do we do with this, right? Because now we've got to hire, I'm not going to do it. I'm the founder. I can't just go out and actually do the execution of the work. I've got to lead the company and be the grower, right? Because the founder wears all the hats.
Right.
He or she is not just the chief executive. They're also the primary, if not the only person going out and developing the business.
Right.
They're also, where the buck stops in terms of operations. They're the client relations person. They're the procurement. They're the logistics manager. They're all of that. And so for this particular company, it was really critical that the very first person we hired beyond his part-time assistant, that we got that person right. Because that sets the tone, right? It's not that every hire is not critical, because I would argue that it is, but it's that first person that you bring on beyond yourself, right? Because a company at a startup mode is an expression of the personality of its founder.
Right.
And so you not only want somebody who can execute what you need them to execute and delight the client, you need them to augment the culture that so far was just you and your big personality. So we were extremely diligent and deliberate about who we were looking for that first person. And I'm happy to say that person continues to be part of that client company. We got it right? We were very diligent in how we vetted him, how we reviewed all of the candidates for that role, and then how we ended up building the infrastructure around him, to be able to do his job as effectively as possible and grow with as few barriers as possible.
What was the role that you were hiring for?
So this was at the time it was a project manager, because we needed someone who had a good civil engineering background, but could literally manage from the ground up this brand new client operation.
Right.
He is now a director of all of the operations for the company.
So that's very interesting, because it seems like when companies are in that growth mode, it's kind of like look around and see if you can find someone and just bring them on board because I got to fill a spot.
Yeah.
And you guys didn't go that way.
It's a big mistake that a lot of founders, a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of startups make when they're in that manic growth mode, to scoop up the available talent. There's a huge difference between available talent and the right talent. And we knew that first employee, may not stay with us the 8 or 9 years that it ends up he has been staying, but he was going to set the tone for how we hired, who we hired, and how we were going to bring them on board. So it is really, really important, especially as a small company, to get that hiring right. A big company has more capacity for bad hires, right? They can absorb a mediocre performer or a mismatch in the chemistry and the culture. A startup doesn't have that luxury.
So that's interesting, because you talked about bringing on someone who was going to augment the culture. What do you mean by that?
So, like I said, a company at the startup mode is an expression, a direct expression of the founder's personality, right? And partly, to one of your earlier questions, part of the trick is you want to retain, bottle up, and infuse in the team as you grow as much of the founder's personality that serves you as possible as you move forward, right? Yes. So for this first person that we hired, it was important not only that he meets the definition of the job from a technical standpoint, from a roles and responsibilities, but that he would mesh well with the founder. And that does not mean go find me somebody identical to how he thinks and how he looks and his background and his religious affiliation and all of those sorts of things. But the chemistry had to be there. And it's not about being same. It's about being compatible and complementary. We needed somebody who could help balance out what the founder brought to the table, because, especially as at that point, 2.5 person company, it was really important to get that balance right.
How did you define what sort of compatibilities you were looking for? How did you describe that? How did you go about that process so you could direct the interviewing or the hiring process to find those qualities?
Yeah, great question. So, it starts with really getting to know the person you're hiring for, right? This was not just a hiring manager. This was a founder of a company that had to succeed and had to find that right first person. So the first step to that is not, in traditional HR would say, well, get the role really well defined.
Right.
Obviously, you have to do that. But the very first step to do, especially with your first hire, is to get inside the head of the founder and really understand not just what they say they're looking for, but what they truly need.
How did you do that?
You have to be part therapist, right? You have to kind of read the bumps on the skull, so to speak. I mean, full disclosure, I also used some pretty powerful assessment tools that helped me, kind of uncover in the candidates that I didn't have an opportunity to know as well as I was getting to know the founder, but that would give me some of those insights into what are the value systems that drive this person? How do they think? How do they kind of process the world? And is that going to, again, complement this founder? Or is it going to be two people that think the same, look the same, walk the same, talk the same?
What assessments did you use?
I actually used, it's a 3-part assessment and I still use it. It's really powerful. It's by a company called Metrics. And so I'm sure you've heard of DISC, the behavioral profile. So it's 1 part DISC. And then it also has what makes it, I think, really powerful is it has a values index. So, kind of uncovering how you are internally fueled, right? What your definitions of rewards are. And then there's an attributes index, which really gets to the heart of how you process your external environment, the voices in your own head, and what are you naturally talented at. And so when you look at those 3 things together, it's kind of like looking at an X-ray, a CAT scan, and an MRI, right? It gives you 3 different angles on the person. And so beyond just your standard, recruiting of, does this person match up against the expectations of the role? And the interview process where, you kind of get to a behavioral level and how do they interpret, how do they solve problems? A suite of tools like that I happen to use really kind of give you an unvarnished, very deeply personal, but deeply revealing insight into how they tick and are they going to be the right fit for this particular founder.
So that was Metrics. Did I hear that right?
Metrics, that's correct.
All right. So we'll link to that in the show notes so that you guys have that. I think that's interesting how you had something like the DISC, which is behavioral in nature, and then you hit the values and the attributes as well. That's very interesting. So you're at the point of growth and you're doing your due diligence to hire correctly. And I do think it's so wise to hire slowly as opposed to quickly and then regret later. What is the consequence to a company where, you see this company, they have tons of potential, but they always seem to be either going in circles or stubbing their own foot or shooting themselves in the foot or whatever you want to say? What is the consequence of that struggle if they can't figure it out when they're in that growth period?
Yeah, well, the most obvious consequence is if you continue to run in circles, you're not actually moving forward, right? And one of the reasons for that is, again, kind of going back to the founder or the leader of a small business. I am one. I'm an entrepreneur, and I'm the head of my own very small consulting business. We constantly have voices and ideas running around our heads, and so part of the dilemma, if you will, of a founder or a CEO, even of a large company, is to what extent do I let other people in on all the ideas and all the voices, and when is the right time to share an idea? Because we don't want to take people off of the focus of doing their job and kind of delighting the client and meeting the needs of a contract or a project. But oftentimes it is a very isolating feeling to be a founder or an entrepreneur or especially a solopreneur, but somebody who is now trying to lead a team. And perhaps they're not, naturally equipped to do that, right? Because entrepreneurs, a lot of times we're lone wolves. We kind of march to our own beat. And so it's a matter of helping them get those voices in their head, as I like to say, flying in formation, which is a key challenge, but it is necessary for getting not just yourself, but the team you're trying to lead to move forward in the right direction, not continue to go in circles.
So there's a couple of things there. There's 2 aspects there, not disclosing too much because you want people to stay focused, but then also being able to, because the voices in the head, that's something we all experience as entrepreneurs because we're always wondering what's next. And how am I going to get there? And what if that doesn't work? What do I need to, so those voices are definitely there. What's a good way for an entrepreneur to begin to process those voices and get them out into clear thinking so that they can perhaps be acted upon?
Yeah, the most valuable thing for any founder, any leader, and again, of a company of any size, is to have a sounding board
Mm-hmm.
that they trust, that they can
Mm.
be completely open, transparent, vulnerable with. Sometimes that is the employees, right? If you've got a very intimate culture and it's still in the startup phase, and you got a couple of your longtime friends to go in with you on a company, sometimes that's your sounding board. Other times it's a coach or a consultant.
Right.
And other times it's, other business leaders in your network that, you sort of tap into as an informal mentor. You just made the point. We've all been there. We all have voices in our heads.
Yep.
We all have ideas. And you're not going to know which ones are the right ones
Right.
until you voice them.
Right. Why don't entrepreneurs take advantage of those three things that you talked about there, either employees or a consultant or peers? Why don't they?
In my experience, the biggest hindrance to that is bandwidth. So a lot of founders, again, are wearing multiple hats. They are everything. They are the strategist, the business developer, now the people leader, right? And they don't know how to give themselves permission, take a break from that daily noise, because they think, well, and I've said to everybody that I've ever kind of consulted and coached, I said, do you schedule thinking time?
Mm-hmm.
What do you mean thinking time? Like time apart from, even if it's just to close your office door, let alone, physically leave and kind of walk around, like really bank in thinking time that you can devote not just to working in the business, but thinking about the business and where you want it to get to. You're not going to get perspective if you are constantly in the soup, right? And so that to me is the key kind of objection that founders have is, oh, I just don't have time for that. We've got, client deadlines, and I've got people to manage, and I've got bills to pay, and I've got this and that and the other. And that's part of this circular, kind of frenzy that we get ourselves into. If you don't actively not just give yourself permission, but demand of yourself as the founder and as the beacon, right, shedding the light for how we're going to move forward. If you don't give yourself and require of yourself that kind of thinking time where you can get above the noise, get your voices in the proper order, right, and really figure out, what is in the best interest of your company and the people you're trying to lead, then you're doing yourself a disservice.
So let's talk about this a little bit. The idea of that thinking time. There's a couple of aspects here. The idea of giving yourself permission to do it. When, in your view, is the best time to have that thinking time?
First thing in the morning.
Okay, why?
First thing in the morning, because you are not too cluttered up yet, mentally or physically or schedule-wise. It was an insight that I actually had, kind of midway through my consulting, which was, we are so, I said before, I joked that if you're not managing robots, we get to be so robotic in our daily routines, right? We kind of just not even thinking about it. We get up, we make breakfast, or maybe grab a quick cup of coffee, and then we immediately get to it.
Right.
In terms of sort of our pre-programmed routine of we sit at the computer, we walk around, our office, whatever it is that we do. And so I have found that my days and my weeks and my years, quite frankly, are more productive and more forward moving when I reprogram that. And I say, I'm not going to just, go into my office and start opening up emails and firefighting just out of habit. I'm actually going to spend some time with myself. And it's so important to do that. And especially early in the morning when you're fresh, hopefully well rested, and you haven't just jumped into the fray just yet. So carving out some time.
How much time?
First thing in the morning. I try to spend an hour, good solid hour every morning, which I'm not a morning person. So I have had to kind of discipline myself to get up a little bit earlier, have a good breakfast, and then literally take my cup of coffee and sit in a comfortable chair in a different room from the computer, the email, and the phone. And, just work on things. Mindfulness, do a little bit of reading, just do a little bit of thinking. And I always have a notebook handy because you'd be surprised what insights kind of jump to the top of the voices in your head when you give yourself that space.
No, I'm with you 100%. The challenge that I think a lot of people have, so I'm a construction executive, or I'm a superintendent or a project manager. I'm up in the morning And, my guys are going to be hitting the job site at 5:30, 6 in the morning. They're going to be out there kicking some butt real early. Where do I find the time? And an hour, it sounds like a lot. How do you help people who really have those early morning stacks of actual stuff that's happening?
Yeah. The thought of giving yourself this sort of time first thing in the morning does not mean you have to confine yourself to, physically separating yourself from the company. I have clients who have said that exact thing, right? Well, in the morning, I need to be visible. I need to be seen because my guys start early. There's nothing preventing you. In fact, I encourage it. Walk around the site. You don't have to have 1 hour of fully uninterrupted time where you say, nobody talk to me, I'm doing my mindfulness, right?
Yeah, right.
You can physically walk, right? You can physically walk around your construction site, and walk and talk and think. Just the sheer separation from your quote unquote normal morning routine of perhaps going straight into the office, straight in front of the computer and saying, okay, what emails are waiting for me? What fires are waiting for me? Physically walking around, which is good exercise, right? You're going to be able to see your employees. More importantly, they're going to see you. The message that you send when you are a construction executive of walking the site every morning is a good habit for your people to see you getting into.
Yeah. So, if you're out in the field, obviously walking the site, if you're in the office, being visible is also something that can be very beneficial. I was talking to a construction executive just recently, and he has a habit of visiting with people in his office, walking around, making sure that guys and gals are doing well. And that really helps as far as building those relationships. So it's really interesting. We're talking about the need to have that thinking time. Let's just explore this a little bit more. How have you seen executives get out of this growth struggle, this struggle to grow in a healthy way? What are some effective things that you've seen and you've helped people in terms of getting on the growth path in the right way? We've already talked about the hiring process. We've talked about mindfulness and just thinking about your business. What are some other areas we can hit on here?
There's actually this great framework, and if you'll indulge me, I'll take a couple of minutes to take you and your audience through this. But
please do.
Yeah, that I've kind of found, and this is something that literally could take you 15 minutes, and it's something that you'll kind of go back to and revisit. That really has helped founders and executives and business leaders figure out how to retain the best of the culture that they started with. And I think I said earlier, kind of bottle it up, right? The point I did make earlier was, bottling up what serves you going forward.
Yeah.
And it's often difficult to see that. So here's kind of a quick exercise to help you do that. And you're going to make 3 lists. And the first list is you're going to think back to the early days, kind of the creation story, if you will, or the birth of your company, your startup, your entrepreneurial venture. And this is a great way to spend your thinking time in the morning, right? And you're going to think about what drove me to do this? What drove me to start this company or accept this leadership position or kind of go out on my own in the entrepreneurial venture? What were some of the things that motivated me to do it, right? What do you, and from the beginning, what did you uniquely offer? What was kind of your unique value proposition, but, getting to the essence of that, who were you serving? When you first started? Why did that matter to them? And why did it matter to you? Who are the people that helped you from the very beginning, right? What was some of the DNA, if you will, of those early supporters, those first employees? Thinking back to the first person you hired, if you in fact did hire somebody, thinking back to those early mentors, if you started out on your own. What were some of the things that they brought to the table that you can look back and say that really made a difference, got my head on straight, right? So that's your first list. So kind of jotting that down, and this is something that you can do real quickly and then you can go back to and refine. You're going to draw a circle around that. Your second list is where you're sitting right now. This is your present day. What are your current priorities? What are the things, the services, the products, the differentiators that your clients and your customers and your employees, if you have them, come to you for, rely upon you for, talk in positive terms about, right? So this is kind of your present. What are we doing effectively now that we want to keep going? And what pivots have we made since we started this venture? Okay. So that's list number 2. You're going to draw a circle around that. And the third list is looking future forward at the dream. And I'll equate it to Elon Musk, who is kind of my go-to example of, somebody who literally does not sit back on his early successes. Now he's enamored with, we're going to go to the moon. We're going to go to Mars, and he's going to be the guy and the company and the team that are going to not just get us there, but colonize Mars, right?
All right.
That's a hugely ambitious mission. What's your Mars shot, right?
Okay.
What is your equivalent of that longer term? What's the dream outcome for your company, for your entrepreneurial venture, for yourself as a person? What's that legacy, that Mars mission look like for you?
Yep.
So that's a very future focused, not entirely blue sky. You must have some ideas of that, but being as aspirational as you can be. You draw a circle around that.
Okay.
What's interesting is the more thought you put into those 3 lists, the more time you kind of refine them. And I would suggest you do this in a couple of installments, right? You make that initial list, you kind of go back to it, you refine it a little bit. When you draw the circles around them, you start to bring those 3 circles together. There's going to be, if you picture a Venn diagram,
right,
there's going to be an overlap.
Sure.
There's going to be ideally a sweet spot where all 3 of those, there are elements of those 3 that come together and intersect. That is, I call it the founder's sweet spot, but this works for executives of larger companies and entrepreneurs even that are only ever want to be solopreneurs.
Yeah.
Finding that sweet spot not only helps you to bottle up the great pieces of your founder's culture that you want to continue to bring forward, it also helps you to focus the voices in your head, the decisions that you make, the people that you evaluate and consider hiring, the values that you want to hold true to as part of your culture. So doing that kind of an exercise, really committing to doing it. And I mean, we just did it in a couple of minutes. It doesn't take hours and hours to do it.
Right.
But if you're honest with yourself and you do it and you refine it and you come back to it and you move those circles together, that sweet spot in the middle is your true north, is your compass that's going to guide your decisions going forward.
So let me ask you a couple of questions about that. Why do you start off with the early days? Why not just, hey, where are we at right now and where do we need to be and let's get going? Why do you go back to the past?
There's a moment when an entrepreneur, a business leader, a startup, a founder is so driven and so inspired by their passion project, if you will, that they're going to go and take that leap, right? They're going to start that company. They're going to go into that venture. They're going to leave the cocoon of corporate, whatever it is.
Yep.
You want to go back to that because there is power in that nostalgia. There is immense value in reconnecting with and reigniting why you went down this crazy road to begin with.
Yeah.
So that is hugely important to remind yourself of where you started. And it also kind of helps you see how far along the road you've come.
Right. That's interesting. So when you're at the point of where you're sitting now, did I hear you right when you're saying that you're stating it in positive terms?
You're stating it in positive terms because this exercise, and let me sort of, dispel this is not a rose-colored glasses type of an exercise, right? But the point of this framework is to identify what you want to keep, what you want to strengthen, and what you want to move forward, right? There's all sorts of frameworks and exercises around what do we want to stop doing. Now, this certainly helps you do that too, because if it falls outside of the sweet spot, right? If it doesn't overlap with even 2 of the circles, let alone the 3,
right? It's
something you seriously have to consider either revamping, improving, or completely eliminating from your.
So let me just interrupt you there. What kind of stuff falls out of the sweet spot that you've seen?
I've seen things like entire business lines no longer serving a company, right? As we grow, as we pivot, going back to that concept of there's all these ideas that I've got in my head. And what if we do this? And what if we do that? And a lot of entrepreneurs and founders are so well-intentioned and they say, "Oh, I got another brainstorm this morning. Let me go take it to the team and let's noodle it."
Right.
There are certain ones of those out of which innovation and forward growth is born. There are others that are merely shiny object syndrome and they're a distraction.
Yes.
And sometimes there are things that linger too long. And so, some of those shiny objects turn into ideas, that turn into projects, that turn into plans, that when you look at it in the harsh light of day through a framework like this, you can now sit back and say, that's not really in keeping with why we started this to begin with. And this doesn't move us forward toward our Mars shot, I should say.
Yeah, no. Okay. And then in terms of the third part of the third circle there, I think this is a really powerful idea of the Mars shot. And it's interesting because, when going back to Elon, a lot of people may mock him. And, people kind of like that. People either really love a guy like that or they kind of hate a guy like that, it seems. If I'm an entrepreneur, how do you help people to sort of be courageous, if you like, and put out there what they really want to accomplish, even if it might seem to other people to be a stretch or perhaps out of the realm of possibility?
My first indicator that I'm onto something is when somebody tells me I'm nuts for thinking it, right? It's the reaction I got when I told my coworkers that after close to 20 years in corporate America, I was going to go out on my own and, do my own thing and become an entrepreneur. Elon Musk probably on a daily basis, even today, is told he's out of his mind.
Absolutely.
Well, you've had some crazy ideas in the past, but this one is really, too far. But look at how far he has come. This is a co-founder of PayPal, which was ingenious enough. Then he went out and made, the electric car. He didn't invent the electric car, but he made it commercialized where they're on the road every single day. He saw things that he could get behind, and he didn't like the bureaucracy and the slowness with which those things were progressing.
Yep.
And he decided to go out, and do it. To me, if it's something that as I was expressing to somebody the other day, if when you describe to somebody your aspiration for where you want to take yourself, your business, your entrepreneurial venture, and you get butterflies as you're describing it, or goosebumps, if you like, or however you want to describe it, you have to go in that direction.
Okay.
Because life is too short to be complacent or to settle with the place that you are if it's not completely fulfilling for you.
Sure. So then if I'm doing this exercise and the way you were describing it, it's something that an individual could do. If I have a larger company and let's say we've been around for a while, who should I bring in from my company to participate in an exercise like this?
This is such a great, and I'm going to say team building exercise, but not team building in the sense that we've all gotten tired of, right? This is a great way to bring together and to align and to boost the collaboration of a company. Every executive I know who has grown a company comes to me at first with the same complaint. They say, I can't get my guys to cooperate and collaborate. Why is that? And I always say to them, well, part of the problem is you only bring them together for progress reports, which is boring and tedious. For progress reports, just going around the table and what are you working on and how's that going? And it's boring and nobody likes it and it's a necessary evil, right? And you're also incentivizing them to achieve individual targets. So if you tell them, I expect you to collaborate, but you reward them based on the individual targets you give them, which thing is going to win out, right? They're going to go toward where they are rewarded. And it's not always just dollar amount, it's advancement, it's recognition, it's all of those things.
Right.
So this is a great exercise to bring together, depending on the size of the company, your entire team,
right,
or at least your leadership team, or maybe a cross-section of folks that were with you from the beginning, folks that are here with you now, and some leaders and individual contributors that you see something in them in terms of they've got that innovative spark, or they could be a potential change agent for you. So the answer depends on the size of the company and where you are in your evolution. But anytime you can get even a couple of people around the table to build out this framework, it's only going to become richer because you're also going to get some other feedback. Even as a founder looking back and saying, why did we go on this crazy journey to begin with? Right. You're going to get some interesting perspective that you perhaps had not thought of.
What do you do when you're doing this exercise and let's say you go back in the past and you think about the early days, and as you're thinking about the future, there's a real radical change perhaps that's happening in your business, and some of the folks that you value are on board with that, but then other folks in your company who you you value as well. They're good people, but for whatever reason, they're not on board with that. How do you handle that?
So this is where that sweet spot continues to be valuable, right? Because the clearer you are on what you are in business to accomplish, both
Right.
now and moving forward, and why that matters to you, to your clients, to the the impacts you want to make on the world, to the employees that are under your care. The more focused you are around that, and the more clear you are around that, it becomes a guidance measure for the employees you want to attract and retain. And also, to your point, there are quite likely going to be some people who say, you know what, I'm glad we got clarity around that. But part of what that crystallized for me is I'm not feeling it, and this isn't really where I want to be. It actually makes the separation of the wrong talent a lot easier, because now you're not in that mode where you kind of sense they're not feeling it, they're not on board, they're not contributing their best, but they're doing just enough not to get fired.
Yep. Yeah, that's good. That's good. And you can never be afraid to have those kinds of crossroads conversations with people.
Well, absolutely. And it goes back to the difference between, we said, available talent and the right talent. It also makes a difference, the right talent versus the best talent, right? Mm-hmm. We talk a lot about superstars and rock stars and A players.
Yeah.
The A players that you have sitting here today may not, in fact, be the same ones as you pivot, as you grow, as you evolve, and certainly as you get clarity on what is that sweet spot that you want to retain.
Yep. Yeah, no, that's excellent. So the founder's sweet spot, you sit down, you think about what the early days were like, you go through that creation story, then you think about where we are now, what's working, how are we succeeding, and then you look into the future and you say, what's our Mars shot? And you draw the Venn diagram, you're looking for that sweet spot in the middle where there's some overlap that you can say, here's where we're going to draw our energy, and here's where we're going to draw our momentum for what we're going to be doing moving forward.
That's right.
Okay, excellent. So let's say I'm growing a company. I'm at that point, whether I've been successful in the past or I'm just beginning to feel that success where the growth is beginning to have maybe a negative impact, and I'm beginning to see that. What do I need to do in the next 30, 60, 90 days to begin to get on the path to healthy growth?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you haven't already done this sort of Venn diagram exercise, absolutely, that's your first thing. It's no cost. It doesn't take a great deal of time. It's a great opportunity to spark some collaboration and some, getting some input from others around you. Mm-hmm. And then it's using that guidance to reevaluate some of your day-to-day decisions, right? Because it's not the be-all and end-all. If you do that framework, that's awesome. You're in a much better place than you were the 10 minutes before you started it, right? But now you have to actually use that, validate that, and then continue to evolve that, because you made an interesting comment earlier about as we're in current days, some of the markets shift, some external forces will happen that we just can't foresee, right? Yes. There may be things that happen tomorrow in the market, to your competitors, to the economy, et cetera, that may radically change your perspective on this framework that you've just completed. Right. So it's a great starting point. What I would say in terms of the 30, 60, 90 is to continue to, well, actually not even continue, start to have conversations around that sweet spot, right? Internally, with your clients and customers, with your leaders and your mentors, and really use that as a lens through which you revisit some of the processes you have. The greatest way to become more efficient is to ask your employees how they can do their job more effectively. Right. If they, hey, Joe, I see that we've got a process in here, an SOP that has 40 steps. Do we need all 40? If you got from start to finish, how many steps would you need and what are they? Right. Asking those employees, and that's where this talking about the construction executive, the value of walking around the site, talking to different people. Just because you're going to be more intentional and have more thinking time, more mindfulness, doesn't mean it's a solo mission all the time. A lot of times it's just walking around and asking powerful questions of the people around you that are going to help you focus your thinking and think in different ways. Because the other part of not giving voice outside to those voices in your head is you do get into this sort of feedback loop with no one but yourself.
Mm.
And you either get completely enamored with the ideas going on, or they never come to fruition because you're just constantly noodling them internally.
So let me ask you, just as we wrap up here, you mentioned something about powerful questions. And one of the ones that you just mentioned was, talking to the folks who are actually doing the work and asking them, do we need all these steps in this process? What are some other examples of powerful questions that executives can ask to help them get clarity and make forward progress in terms of the things we've been talking about?
The one that I have found to be the most powerful and is the least asked, and it is especially powerful and valuable if you ask when it's a new employee, but it's not to say you shouldn't take the opportunity, even if they're a long tenured employee, is to ask your employees what they are passionate about.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason that's so important is, we're talking about executives, we're talking about entrepreneurs, we're talking about startups where, again, we did that first part of the framework, which was a bit nostalgic, to remind ourselves and reignite why we were passionate to start this.
Right.
If you can find a way to connect what you're asking your employees to do, I don't care if they are high-powered executives or your frontline construction workers. If you can help them see a connection between what they care about and how that contributes positively to your Mars shot, you're going to get more deeply loyal, more deeply enthusiastic, more innovatively thinking employees. And even on a construction site, innovation can not only save you money, it can help you grow.
Excellent.
So that's a very powerful question. And I would say the other one would be, and even just, when you're kind of walking around the site, ask people why they stay.
Right.
It's no longer about what made you join. It's what makes you stay.
That's a good
and
one.
What's going to continue to make you stay, because that's going to help inform much more of your forward thinking. It's more of a leading indicator than the question of why you joined, which was it's a bit of a lagging, right?
Yeah, that's interesting. Why do you stay? That's a good one. Excellent. Well, I tell you, I really, really appreciate your time here today, Claire. Can you just let us know how we can get in touch with you if we'd like to?
Sure, absolutely. 2 websites you can come and find me. The first is clairechandler.net. You'll learn a lot more about me and my work and some of the clients that I've served. And the other one, which I just launched recently, is profitableswagger.com. You'll see that behind me here on the visual.
There you go.
And that's really geared toward executives and leaders who want to tap into some of those internal voices and really get on a much faster track to growth.
Excellent. And I know you do have a number of books that are available as well. You want to recommend a couple of those?
Sure. The 2 I would love to give a shout out to are my first book, which is The Whirlpool Effect. And the one that came out earlier this year with my co-author, Ben Baker, is called Leading Beyond a Crisis. And you can find both of those books on Amazon.
Excellent. I will put links in the show notes to both of the websites and both of the books. And I just like to ask at the end of my interviews, if I remember, and I've remembered today, Claire, tell us your favorite place to eat. We're looking for recommendations.
Oh, goodness. Well, it's a difficult time to ask that question, what with all the restrictions, but it would have to be either any of the Italian restaurants in New Jersey where I live, or if I'm going to go Mars shot on you, it's this beautiful restaurant on the beach in Curacao where my husband and I honeymooned.
Oh, interesting. All right. Well, let me ask, in New Jersey, what's your favorite Italian?
Oh, gosh. There's so many, but I will give a shout out to the one that has been a family favorite for the longest, which is DeMeo's Cucina, which is in Berkeley Heights, New Jersey.
DeMeo's in Berkeley Heights.
Yep.
So it's not Satriali's, huh?
It is not.
That's my little Sopranos joke for the day.
I love that. Well, at least you didn't go like Jersey Shore and ask me if I've met Snooki, which I haven't, by the way.
Yeah. No, I'm way more Sopranos than I am Jersey Shore.
Excellent. As am I, my friend. As am I.
Beautiful. Well, I really appreciate your time today. Thanks so much for joining us, and I really appreciate the insights you shared with us, Claire.
Thanks, Eric. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Construction Genius. Hope you found that 1% of inspiration to help you in the next few days. If you like the show, please give us a 5-star review on iTunes, share it with other construction leaders who you think would benefit, and always remember that the show is brought to you by Kick-Ass Meetings. I've been working with construction leaders since 2004, teaching them how to run extremely effective problem-solving meetings that gets their people collaborating, taps into their creativity, And to get yourself a free copy of the Kick-Ass Meeting Report, go to www.ericanderton.com/kickassmeetings. Grab yourself that free report, read it, use it in your business. You'll find it extremely useful. And thanks again for listening.